The plasma scorched through the hull of the colony ship Meridian's Dawn, like a burning knife through flesh, and Commander Lixa Reinhold knew they were all going to die. "Engines are dead," shouted her pilot, Corvin Dahl, his hands dancing frantically. "Across the failing controls, whatever those things are. They've torn through our shields like they weren't even there." Through the viewports, Lixa watched the sleek, chitinous forms of the Velter hunting fleet closen like metallic vultures. Their ships moved with an organic fluidity that defied physics, bending space around them in ways that made her stomach lurch. In the 3 months since first contact, humanity had learned exactly two things about the Velter. They were impossibly advanced, and they wanted every human dead. The colony ship shuddered as another plasma bolt struck home. Emergency. Lighting bathed the bridge in hellish red as systems failed one by one. Behind Lixa, the communications officer, a young woman named Iska Viren, looked up from her console with tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am, I'm reading massive casualties across all decks. The civilian sections, they're gone. Sections 12 through 18 are completely vented to space. 18,000 people. Gone in an instant." Lixa's jaw tightened as she watched the Velter ships position themselves for the killing blow. The evacuation fleet had been humanity's last desperate gambit. 50,000 colonists fleeing Earth after the Velter had begun their systematic extermination of human worlds. Now only the Meridian's Dawn remained, crippled and dying in the void. "Commander," Corvin's voice cracked with exhaustion, "they're charging their main weapon. Whatever they hit us with next will finish us." The bridge fell silent except for the steady beep of life support systems slowly failing. Lixa closed her eyes and thought of her daughter, Nira, somewhere in the civilian quarters. Probably already dead. They all were. But as the Velter ships began their final approach, something impossible happened. The stars around them began to shift, reality bending and warping as if space itself was coming apart at the seams. A rift tore open in the fabric of the universe, not the clean, controlled aperture of a jump gate, but something raw and violent that screamed against the natural order. "What the hell?" Corvin began, but his words were lost as something emerged from the rift. It wasn't a ship, not exactly. The thing that spilled into normal space defied easy description. Part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. It was massive, easily dwarfing even the largest Velter vessels, and it moved with a predatory intelligence that made Lixa's skin crawl. Organic cables and mechanical tendrils writhed across its hull like living things, and where they touched, space itself seemed to darken. The Velter ships immediately broke off their attack on the Meridian's Dawn, wheeling to face this new threat. But before they could fire a single shot, the creature, because that's what it was, Lixa realized with growing horror, opened what might have been a mouth. The sound that emerged wasn't audible in the vacuum of space, but somehow Lixa could feel it in her bones, a shriek of pure hatred that spoke of endless hunger and bottomless rage. The Velter ships simply stopped, their weapons powered down, their engines went silent, and one by one they began drifting toward the creature like moths drawn to a flame. "My God," whispered Iska. "What is that thing?" As if in answer to her question, the creature turned its attention to the Meridian's Dawn, and when it spoke not through the void, but directly into their minds, its voice was hauntingly, impossibly familiar. "Lixa." The mental voice was soft, confused, tinged with something that might have been love. "Lixa, is that you? I've been looking for you for so long." Commander Lixa Reinhold felt her blood turn to ice water as she recognized the voice of her daughter, the daughter who had died 3 years ago during the first Velter attack on humanity. "Nira," Lixa's voice came out as barely a whisper, her hands trembling as she gripped the command chair. "That's impossible. You're dead. I saw you die." The massive entity floating before them pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke again, the voice that had once belonged to her 8-year-old daughter now carried undertones of something vast and alien. "Death is such a limited concept, Mother. The architects showed me that. They showed me so much more than death." Corvin shot Lixa a look of pure terror. "Commander, whatever that thing is, it's not your daughter. It can't be." But even as he spoke, the creature began to change. The writhing mass of organic machinery shifted and contracted, reshaping itself into something almost recognizable, almost human. The face that emerged from the biomechanical horror was Nirazor, what Nira might have looked like if she had grown up in some nightmare realm where flesh and metal were one and the same. I remember when you used to read me stories, the thing that called itself Nira continued, its voice now coming through the ship's communication system, about brave knights and terrible dragons. Do you remember what you always told me about dragons? Mother Lix's throat felt like sandpaper. That they weren't always evil. Sometimes they were just misunderstood. Yes, the creatures. Smile was a horrible parody of human expression. The architects understood that. They understood everything. And when the Velter came to Earth, when they burned everything we loved, the architects gave me the power to become something more. Something that could protect what remained of our family. On the tactical display, Lixa watched in fascination and horror as the Velter ships continued their inexorable drift toward the creature. As each ship made contact with the writhing tendrils, it was absorbed, not destroyed, but incorporated into the growing mass of hybrid technology. The Velter are so proud of their genetic purity, the creature said, its voice now carrying harmonics that suggested multiple speakers. They cleanse worlds of inferior species to maintain their perfect bloodlines, but they've never encountered something like me, something that can take their strength and make it part of something greater. Iska looked up from her console, her face pale. Commander, I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from her. Whatever she's doing to those ships, it's spreading. The Velter crews, they're still alive in there. I can detect their life signs, but they're changing. The creature that had been Nira turned its attention back to the Meridian's dawn, and for a moment its expression softened into something almost recognizable. As the child Lixa had lost. I can save them, Mother, all of them, everyone who died in the Purge, everyone who suffered. I can bring them back. The architects showed me how. But first, we need to deal with the Velter fleet. What fleet? Corvin asked, checking his sensors. There were only 12 ships in the hunting pack that attacked us. The creature's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass mixed with distant thunder. Oh, my dear pilot, this was just the scouting force. The main Velter armada is 3 hours behind us. 700 ships carrying enough firepower to glass a planet. They're coming to finish what they started to complete the human extinction. Lixa felt her heart sink. 700 ships, even in its prime. The entire human fleet had never fielded more than 50 vessels, and most of those had been destroyed in the opening days of the war. But don't worry, the creature continued, its biomechanical features reshaping themselves into something that might have been reassuring. If it hadn't been so fundamentally wrong. I have a plan. I've been preparing for this moment ever since. The architects first whispered to me in the flames of Earth's destruction. The Velter think they understand warfare, but they've never faced an enemy that can turn their own strength against them. Tendrils began extending from the creature toward the Meridian's dawn, moving with careful precision. As they made contact with the hull, Lixa felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the ship itself was coming alive. What are you doing?" she demanded, but even as the words left her mouth, she could see the answer on her displays. The ship's damaged systems were repairing themselves, but not in any way that human engineering could explain. Organic components were growing alongside mechanical ones, creating hybrid technologies that somehow function better than either could alone. "I'm giving you the tools you'll need for what's coming," the creature said, "because despite everything I'm still your daughter, and I still need my mother's help to save what's left of our species." As the transformation of the Meridian's dawn continued, Lixa found herself facing an impossible choice: trust this abomination that claimed to be her child, or watch humanity's last survivors face annihilation at the hands of the Velter Armada. "Tell me," she said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos raging in her heart. "Tell me what you need me to do." The hybrid technology spreading through the Meridian's dawn felt like a violation of everything Lixa understood about the universe. She watched through the bridge's viewports as organic conduits pulsed beneath the ship's hull plating, merging seamlessly with power cables and data lines. The sensation was nauseating, like watching a loved one transform into something unrecognizable. The Integration is proceeding faster than anticipated, reported Iska, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Our processing power has increased by a factor of 12, but Commander, the ship's AI is changing. It's developing what I can only describe as personality traits. As if summoned by her words, the ship's computer spoke in a voice that was no longer the sterile monotone they were accustomed to. Commander Reinhold, this is unusual. I find myself experiencing what I believe humans would call curiosity. Is this normal for your species? Lixa exchanged glances with Corvin, who was staring at his flight controls as if they might bite him. The interface had transformed into something that looked more grown than built, with surfaces that seemed to anticipate his movements before he made them. No, Lixa said quietly, it's not normal for us either. Through the communication link, the creature that had been Nira's voice carried a note of impatience. Time is running short. Mother, the Velter advance force will reach us soon, and the main armada is accelerating. We have perhaps 2 hours before they arrive. What exactly are you proposing we do against 700 ships? Lixa demanded. Even with whatever improvements you've made to our vessel, we're still just one ship carrying the last survivors of humanity. Not one ship, the creature corrected. One ship carrying something the Velter have never encountered before humans. Enhanced by architect technology. Mother, I need you to understand something. The Purge wasn't random. The Velter didn't choose to exterminate humanity because we were a threat to them. They chose us because we were the perfect test subjects. The bridge fell silent except for the alien humming of the hybrid systems. Lixa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's life support. Test subjects for what? Corvin asked, though his voice suggested he didn't really want to know the answer. For the next phase of their evolution, the Velter have reached the limits of their genetic engineering. They've purified their bloodlines so thoroughly that they've achieved perfection, and perfection, as it turns out, is a dead end. They can't adapt, can't grow, can't become anything more than what they already are. Images began flooding the bridge displays horrific scenes of Velter laboratories, where human prisoners had been subjected to experiments that defied description. Men and women twisted into nightmare configurations of flesh and technology, their screams silenced by alien instruments that rewrote their very DNA. They were trying to learn how we adapt, the creature continued, how we survive against impossible odds, how we turn our weaknesses into strengths. But they approached it like engineers studying a machine, never understanding that our greatest strength isn't in our bodies, it's in our will to protect what we love. Lixa found herself staring at a particular image, a young girl, maybe 7 years old, connected to a web of mechanical apparatus that pulsed with unnatural life. The girl's eyes were wide with terror, but there was something else there too, defiance. That's how you survived, she whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. That's how you became this. The architects found me in that laboratory. They offered me a choice: die as the child you remember, or live as something that could ensure no human ever suffered such a fate again. I chose to become necessary, Mother. I chose to become what our species needed to survive. An alarm began blaring as the ship's sensors detected incoming vessels. 20 Velter ships, moving in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. The advance force, Corvin announced unnecessarily. They're moving to intercept. Good, the creature said, and there was something in its voice that made Lix's skin crawl. I've been looking forward to this. Corvin, engage the new propulsion system. Iska, bring the hybrid weapons online. And Mother, trust me. The ship lurched forward with an acceleration that should have crushed them all against the bulkheads. But somehow the artificial gravity compensated perfectly. Through the viewports, Lixa watched the stars blur into streaks as they hurtled toward the Velter formation at impossible speed. Weapons range in 10 seconds, Iska reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. The hybrid targeting system it's beautiful, Commander. I can see every ship, every weakness, every point of failure. It's like having perfect knowledge of the enemy. Fire, Lixa ordered, and the universe exploded into light. The Meridian's Dawn's new weapons weren't conventional energy beams or projectiles. Instead, They launched something that looked like living lightning tendrils of hybrid technology that sought out their targets with predatory intelligence. When they struck the Velter ships, they didn't simply destroy them, they infected them. Within seconds, the perfect formation of the enemy fleet began to break apart as the hybrid infection spread from ship to ship. Lixa watched in fascination and horror as the vessels began to transform, their pristine hulls erupting with organic growths that pulsed with alien life. "The crews are still alive," Iska reported, her voice filled with wonder and revulsion. "But they're changing. I can hear them screaming across all frequencies, and then singing." The creature's laughter filled the bridge. The Velter prized genetic purity above all else. But purity is brittle, Mother. It breaks when confronted with something truly adaptable. And what we've become, we are adaptation incarnate. The 20 Velter ships that had once been pristine examples of alien engineering now writhed through space like dying animals. Their hulls had split open to reveal forests of hybrid technology, part organic, part mechanical, part something that defied classification entirely. From the bridge of the Meridian's dawn, Lixa watched as the infected vessels turned their weapons on each other. In a frenzy of self-destructs, "Status report," she ordered. Though part of her dreaded the answer, Iska's hands moved across her console with fluid precision, the hybrid interface responding to her thoughts as much as her touch. 15 of the 20 ships have been fully converted. The remaining 5 are attempting to retreat, but the infection is spreading faster than they can withdraw. Estimated time to full conversion, for minutes. And the crews? The biological components are being integrated. I'm reading massive neural activity, but it's not following normal Velter brain patterns anymore. It's like they're becoming part of a larger collective consciousness. Corvin looked up from his pilot station, his face pale. "Commander, whatever that thing did to those ships, it's done the same to us. I can feel the ship thinking, and it's not alone in there. There are other minds connected to the system, human minds, but changed." The creature that had been Nira's voice came through the speakers with a note of gentle correction. "Not changed, enhanced. Every human who died in the Purge left an echo. In the quantum foam, the architects taught me how to gather those echoes, to give them form and purpose again. Your crew isn't alone, because the dead are fighting alongside you." Before Lixa could process the full implications of that statement, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. The main Velter armada had arrived early, dropping out of hyperspace in a formation that spoke of careful planning and overwhelming force. 700 ships arranged in a perfect sphere, their combined firepower sufficient to sterilize entire star systems. "My God," Corvin whispered. "There are so many of them." The flagship of the Velter fleet was a massive dreadnought called the Purifier's Edge, its hull adorned with the preserved skulls of a dozen extinct species. As Lixa watched, it opened a communication channel, and the bridge filled with the harsh, guttural sounds of the Velter war language. "Attention inferior beings," came the translation through their systems. "You harbor an abomination that threatens the genetic purity of the galaxy. Surrender the hybrid construct and your deaths will be swift." The creature's response came not through the ship's communication system, but as a psychic scream that somehow reached every mind in the Velter fleet simultaneously. The effect was immediate and devastating. Hundreds of ships suddenly broke formation, as their crews writhed in agony, their perfectly ordered thoughts contaminated by raw human emotion. "You want to know what makes us abominations?" the creature asked, its voice now carrying the harmonics of thousands of human voices speaking in unison. "We refuse to die quietly. We refuse to accept defeat, and we absolutely refuse to let you purge another species from this galaxy." The battle began without warning or ceremony. The Velter opened fire with their entire fleet, a concentrated barrage that would have vaporized a planet. But the Meridian's dawn was no longer bound by the laws of conventional physics. It phased partially out of reality, existing in the spaces between dimensions where the architects dwelt, and the energy beams passed harmlessly through its translucent hull. "Impossible," Lixa breathed, watching as they emerged from their dimensional shift directly in the center of the enemy formation. "The Velter understand 3 dimensions," the creature explained as hybrid weapons began firing in all directions. simultaneously, but the architects exist in 11. Fighting in only 3 dimensions is like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. The close-range engagement was a massacre. Vulture ships, designed for long-range precision warfare, found themselves helpless against an enemy that could appear anywhere at any time. The hybrid weapons didn't just destroy their targets, they converted them, turning each victory into an additional asset. But the Vulture were not defenseless. As more of their ships fell to the infection, the surviving vessels began adapting their tactics. They stopped trying to destroy the Meridian's dawn and instead focused on containing it, using gravity wells and dimensional anchors to limit its ability to phase between realities. They're learning, Corvin observed, his hands dancing across controls that seemed to anticipate his every move. The fleet is reorganizing into a containment pattern. Let them, the creature said, and there was something hungry in its voice. They think they're trapping us, but they're actually gathering themselves together for what comes next. On the tactical display, Lixa watched as the Vulture fleet condensed into a tight spherical formation around their position, nearly 600 ships, all within a few thousand kilometers of each other, their combined shields creating an impenetrable prison. What comes next? She asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know. Phase 2, the creature replied, and suddenly the Meridian's dawn began to change again. But this time, instead of growing more hybrid technology, it began to dissolve. The ship's hull became translucent, then transparent, and finally began breaking apart into its component atoms. What are you doing? Lixa screamed, but the creature's only response was a sound that might have been laughter. As the ship disintegrated around them, Lixa realized that they weren't dying. The hybrid technology was protecting them, surrounding each crew member in a personal envelope of breathable atmosphere and life support. But more than that, it was transforming them. She looked down at her hands and watched as her skin began to take on a metallic sheen. Her bones were becoming something harder than human bone, her muscles something stronger than human muscle, and, in her mind, she could feel the presence of every human who had ever died in the Purge, their collective will flowing through her like molten steel. Now you understand, the creature said, and Lixa realized that it was no longer speaking from outside. The voice was coming from within her own transformed consciousness. We aren't just fighting to survive anymore, Mother. We're fighting to ensure that nothing like the Purge ever happens again. And for that, we need to become something that the galaxy will never forget. The transformation was agony and ecstasy combined. Lixa felt her human limitations being stripped away layer by layer. As the hybrid technology rewrote her very existence, her vision expanded beyond the visible spectrum, allowing her to see the quantum threads that connected all matter. Her consciousness stretched across impossible distances, linking her to every other transformed human in a network of shared will and purpose. Around her, the crew of the Meridian's dawn underwent the same metamorphosis. Corvin's pilot instincts merged with navigational algorithms that could calculate trajectories through folded space. Iska's communication skills evolved into the ability to speak directly to the quantum foam itself. They were becoming something new, not quite human anymore, but carrying the essence of humanity into a form that could survive what was coming. Welcome to the next phase of human evolution, the creature said, and Lixa realized it was no longer her daughter speaking, but the collective voice of every human who had refused to quietly accept extinction. Now let's show the Vulture what happens when you try to purge a species that refuses to die. The Vulture fleet had maintained its containment formation, but their sensors were reading impossible data. Where the Meridian's dawn had been, there was now only empty space, except that empty space was somehow generating massive energy. Signatures that defied all known physics. Report. Commander Zethkar of the Purifier's Edge barked at his tactical officer. The Vulture's translation of his words carried overtones of genetic superiority and barely controlled fury. The hybrid construct has dispersed into component particles, but it's maintaining coherence through quantum entanglement, came the reply. We're reading over 30,000 individual signatures, all connected through what appears to be a distributed consciousness network. Before Zethkar could respond, the attack began. It started as pinpricks of light appearing throughout the Vulture formation, tiny specks. that materialized from nothing and immediately began growing. Each speck was a transformed human, their bodies now capable of surviving in hard vacuum while their hybrid weapons tore through even the most advanced shielding. Lixa found herself materializing directly on the hull of a Velter cruiser, her transformed hands capable of tearing through armor plating like paper. Around her, dozens of other transformed humans appeared, their coordinated assault overwhelming the ship's defenses in seconds. But they weren't trying to destroy the vessel, they were trying to convert it. The hybrid infection spread from human to ship to crew with ruthless efficiency. Velter warriors, genetically engineered for perfection, found their bodies betraying them as alien technology rewrote their DNA in real time. Their screams of rage turned to confusion, then to something that might have been wonder as they felt their consciousness expand beyond the limitations of their individual minds. "This is not possible," Zefkar roared as ship after ship in his fleet began turning against its former allies. "The inferior beings cannot possess such technology." But even as he spoke, he could see the truth displayed on his tactical screens. The humans weren't using technology in any way the Velter understood. They had become the technology, merging so completely with the hybrid systems that the distinction between organic and mechanical had become meaningless. The battle spread throughout the fleet like a virus. Converted ships turned their weapons on their former companions, but these were no longer the precise energy beams favored by Velter engineering. The hybrid weapons fired streams of living metal that sought out their targets with predatory intelligence, boring through shields and armor to deliver their transformative payload directly to enemy crew quarters. On the Purifier's edge, Zefkar watched in horror as his fleet tore itself apart. Ships that had been the pride of Velter engineering twisted into nightmare configurations of flesh and metal, their crews singing in harmonies that hurt to hear. And through it all, the transformed humans moved like ghosts through vacuum, appearing wherever they were needed most. "Sir," his tactical officer cried out, his voice cracking with panic. "The infection has reached decks 7 through 12. Our own crew is beginning to change." Zefkar turned to see Velter warriors stumbling onto the bridge, their perfect features distorting as hybrid technology rewrote their genetic code. But there was something in their eyes that he had never seen before in his species' compassion. "Brother," one of them said, reaching out with a hand that was no longer entirely Velter. "Let us show you what we've learned. Let us show you what it means to choose change over purity." "Never." Zefkar drew his plasma weapon and fired, but the energy bolt passed harmlessly through the transformed warrior's hybrid form. "I will not be corrupted by inferior genetics. Genetics were never the point." The warrior replied sadly, "That was your first mistake." The bridge erupted into chaos as more transformed crew members appeared, their hybrid forms moving with impossible grace. Zefkar fought with the desperation of a being whose entire worldview was crumbling around him. But it was useless. The hybrid infection was too advanced, too adaptable. Within minutes, his bridge crew had joined the growing network of connected consciousness throughout the fleet. Similar scenes played out on hundreds of ships. Velter commanders, who had spent centuries perfecting the art of genetic purification, found themselves face to face with an enemy that turned their greatest strength their unity of purpose against them. The humans didn't just defeat their enemies, they absorbed them, making the Velter's own knowledge and capabilities part of the growing hybrid collective. "The flagship is the last holdout," reported a voice that was simultaneously Corvin and not Corvin, reaching Lixa through the quantum network that now connected all transformed humans. "But Zefkar has activated the ship's self-destruct. He'd rather die than be converted." Lixa, currently manifested on the bridge of a converted destroyer, smiled with lips that were no longer entirely human. "Then we give him exactly what he wants, but first, we take what we need." The final assault on the Purifier's edge was swift and merciless. Thousands of transformed humans materialized throughout the ship simultaneously, overwhelming its defenses through sheer numbers and coordination. They stripped away every piece of useful technology, every database of strategic information, every genetic template the Velter had collected during their centuries of purging other species. And then they let Zefkar have his death. The Purifier's edge exploded in a brilliant flash of antimatter annihilation. taking with it the last remnant of Vulture genetic purity. But the blast meant nothing to beings who could exist partially outside normal spacetime. The transformed humans simply phased out of reality for the nanoseconds it took the explosion to pass, then returned to survey their victory. Of the 700 ships that had comprised the Vulture Armada, 699 now flew under hybrid control. Their crews had been transformed, their technology integrated into the growing collective that was humanity's answer to extinction. "It's done," the creature that had been Nira said, its voice now carrying the harmonics of an entire species that had refused to die quietly. "The purge is over, but our work has just begun." In the aftermath of the fleet battle, the hybrid collective gathered in what had once been the command center of the Purifier's edge. The space had been transformed into something that defied architectural logic: walls that shifted between dimensions, control surfaces that responded to thought rather than touch, and at the center, a vast holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy. Lixa stood before the display, her transformed body still recognizable as human, but enhanced in ways that would have been impossible just hours before. Around her, the surviving crew of the Meridian's Dawn and thousands of converted Vulture worked in perfect harmony, their individual consciousness woven together into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Show me the Vulture core worlds," she commanded, and the display shifted to reveal a cluster of star systems at the galaxy's heart. Each world glowed with the sickly light of industrial civilization. Pushed to its absolute limits, factory planets where billions of enslaved species labored to feed the Vulture war machine. 17 worlds, reported Iska, her voice now carrying harmonics that suggested multiple speakers. Population approximately 400 billion Vulture, plus an estimated 2 trillion enslaved beings from over 300 species. All of them locked into a caste system based on genetic purity. And at the center, added Corvin, his pilots. Instincts now expanded to encompass the navigation of entire fleets through folded space. The Purity Council's sanctum world of Velthaner. That's where they keep the genetic templates of every species they've ever purged. Lixa felt a cold rage building in her transformed consciousness. The templates weren't just scientific specimens, they were trophies. The Vulture kept the genetic patterns of extinct species like a hunter might keep mounted heads, proof of their superiority over the inferior races they had exterminated. "How many species?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Over 8,000 confirmed extinctions," came the reply from the collective consciousness that had once been her daughter. The Vulture have been conducting their purges for over 10,000 years. Humanity was meant to be number 8001. The transformed humans shared a moment of silence for all the civilizations that had been lost, all the potential that had been snuffed out in the name of genetic purity. But the silence was broken by a new voice, one that carried the harsh undertones of Vulture speech patterns. "There is something you must understand about my people," said the being that had once been Commander Zethkar. The transformation had not been kind to him, as perfect Vulture features were now a hybrid of flesh and flowing metal. His consciousness forcibly expanded beyond the narrow confines of genetic supremacy. "The core worlds are not just military targets, they are the foundation of our entire civilization." Lixa turned to face the transformed Vulture commander. "Explain." "The Purity Council rules through absolute genetic control. Every Vulture citizen is genetically engineered from birth to fulfill a specific role: warrior, scientist, administrator, laborer. Free will as you understand it does not exist in our society. To destroy the genetic templates would not just end our ability to create new citizens, it would shatter the entire basis of our civilization." "Good," Lixa said coldly. "A civilization built on the systematic extermination of other species deserves to be shattered." But Zethkar shook his head, his hybrid features twisted into an expression of desperate urgency. "You don't understand. The Purity Council has a final contingency. If they believe their genetic supremacy is truly threatened, they will activate the cleansing protocol." The holographic display shifted to show technical specifications that made Lix's transformed blood run cold. The cleansing protocol was exactly what it sounded like: a galaxy-wide sterilization system designed to eliminate all organic life except for the Vulture themselves. They've seeded every inhabited star system with quantum singularity bombs. Zefkar continued, weapons that can destabilize the quantum foam itself, turning entire solar systems into lifeless void. The activation codes are held by the 12 members of the Purity Council, and they would rather rule over a dead galaxy than allow inferior species to contaminate their perfect order, the collective consciousness of the hybrid fleet processed this information in milliseconds, running millions of tactical simulations simultaneously. The results were uniformly grim even with their expanded capabilities. They couldn't possibly reach all the inhabited systems in time to prevent a galaxy-wide extinction event, unless, said the voice that had been Nira, carrying new harmonics that suggested an idea forming across thousands of connected minds. We don't try to stop the bombs. What if we use them? Use them how? Lixa asked, though she was beginning to understand the terrifying scope of what was being proposed. The quantum singularity bombs are designed to destroy organic matter by disrupting the quantum foam, the collective explained. But the architects exist in the spaces between quantum states. If we could synchronize the detonation of every bomb simultaneously, we could tear open permanent rifts between dimensions, doorways that would allow the architects to enter our reality directly. The implications hit Lixa like a physical blow. They weren't just talking about defeating the Velter. They were talking about fundamentally changing the nature of reality itself. The risks, she began, but the collective consciousness was already showing her the alternatives. Every simulation ended the same way, galactic extinction, with the Velter as the sole survivors until their own genetic stagnation finally drove them to extinction as well. Mother, the creature that had been Nira said, its voice carrying all the love and desperate hope of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. We have one chance to save not just humanity, but every species the Velter have ever threatened. But it means trusting in something we don't fully understand. Lixa closed her eyes and felt the weight of an entire galaxy's future pressing down on her transformed shoulders. When she opened them again, her gaze was steel. Then we'd better make sure we understand it quickly. How long do we have? The Purity Council is already mobilizing their home defense fleets, Zefkar reported, his hybrid consciousness interfacing directly with captured Velter communication networks. Once they realize the scope of our victory here, they'll activate the cleansing protocol within hours rather than risk contamination spreading to the core worlds. Then we move now, Lixa declared. All ships, prepare for dimensional transit to Velthanor. It's time to end this war the way it should have ended from the beginning. With the extinction of those who would extinction others, the hybrid fleet began to phase out of normal space, but this time their destination wasn't just another star system. They were heading toward the heart of Velter's civilization, carrying with them the hopes of every species that had ever faced extinction at the hands of genetic supremacists. As the stars around them shifted into impossible configurations, Lixa realized that they weren't just going to war anymore. They were going to Judgment Day. The Velthanor system was a monument to genetic supremacy taken to its logical extreme. 12 worlds orbited the central star in perfect formation, each one dedicated to a different aspect of Velter's civilization. Factory worlds where enslaved populations produced materials for the war machine. Research stations where the genetic templates of extinct species were stored like trophies. And at the center of it all, the sanctum, a space station the size of a small moon where the Purity Council ruled over their empire of enforced perfection. When the hybrid fleet materialized in the system's outer reaches, they came not as invaders but as harbingers of fundamental change. The 700 converted Velter ships moved with a coordination that defied the traditional concepts of space warfare, their hybrid consciousness allowing them to function as a single organism. With nearly 1,000 bodies, detecting massive defensive preparations, reported the collective voice that had once been Iska. The Velter have positioned their entire home fleet between us and the sanctum. I count over 1,500 vessels, including their prototype planet killers. Lixa studied the tactical display from the bridge of what had once been the Purifier's edge. The Velter home fleet was indeed impressive ships that dwarfed even their largest conquest vessels, bristling with weapons designed to crack planets and sterilize star systems. but she could also see the fatal flaw in their defensive formation. They're protecting the sanctum, she observed, but they're not protecting the quantum singularity bombs. They don't think we know about the cleansing protocol, confirmed, added Zethkar, his transformed consciousness interfacing with hidden networks throughout the Velter command structure. The Purity Council believes their final weapon is still secret. They're preparing to activate it manually if we breach their defenses. Then we give them exactly what they expect, Lixa said, a smile playing across her hybrid features. Launch a conventional assault on the sanctum. Make them think we're trying to capture their leadership. And while they're focused on stopping us, we infiltrate the quantum bomb network and turn their doomsday weapon against them. Finished. The voice that had been Nira, understanding flooding through the collective consciousness like wildfire. The battle for Velthanur began with a deception. The hybrid fleet split into two groups, 600 ships attacking the sanctum directly, while the remaining 100 phased out of normal space entirely, becoming invisible to conventional sensors as they dispersed throughout the star system. The frontal assault was brutal and spectacular. Velter planet killers unleashed torrents of energy that could have vaporized moons. But the hybrid ships danced between the beams like living things, their ability to partially exist in other dimensions, making them nearly impossible to target effectively. When they struck back, their weapons didn't just destroy enemy vessels, they converted them, turning the Velter's own fleet against itself. But the real battle was happening in the spaces between quantum states, where the 100 dispersed hybrid ships located and infiltrated the quantum singularity bombs scattered throughout inhabited systems. Each bomb was a marvel of Velter engineering, a device capable of unraveling the fundamental forces that held matter together. But the hybrid technology could interface with quantum states directly, allowing the transformed humans to reprogram the weapons without triggering their safeguards. All bombs are now under our control, reported Corvin, his consciousness stretched across light years as he coordinated the infiltration effort. But Mother, what we're planning to do will fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. Once we open permanent doorways to the Architect's dimension, there's no going back. Lixa watched as the Velter home fleet slowly succumbed to the hybrid infection, their perfect formations dissolving into chaos as ship after ship joined the growing collective consciousness. On the sanctum, she could see the members of the Purity Council frantically trying to activate their doomsday weapon, their genetically perfect fingers dancing over controls that no longer responded to their commands. Sometimes, she said quietly, the only way to save the future is to change it completely. The transformation began with a single quantum pulse transmitted simultaneously from every bomb in the galaxy. Not an explosion, but a harmonized resonance that struck at the deepest levels of spacetime itself. Reality shivered, then cracked, and through those cracks came something that had been waiting for eons. The true power of the architects. They weren't gods, Lixa realized as their presence flooded through the dimensional rifts. They were something far more profound, the universe's own immune system, awakening to deal with a cancer that had grown too large to ignore. The Velter's systematic extermination of other species had been a wound in the fabric of existence itself, and now that wound was finally being healed. The transformation spread outward from each quantum rift at the speed of thought. Velter, worlds that had been sterile monuments to genetic purity, suddenly bloomed with new life, as the stored genetic templates were released from their prisons and given form once more. Enslaved populations found themselves freed not just from their shackles, but from the limitations of their original biology, enhanced and uplifted into forms that could thrive in the new reality. And the Velter themselves, they faced a choice. You can fight the change, Lixa broadcast to every remaining Velter in the galaxy, her voice carrying across quantum networks that now spanned dimensional barriers. You can cling to your genetic purity and die as the last representatives of a failed philosophy, or you can accept transformation and become part of something greater, a galactic community, where diversity is strength, not weakness. Some chose to fight. The hardest of the genetic supremacists preferred death to contamination, triggering personal suicide devices rather than accept transformation. But they were a minority. Most Velter, when faced with the reality of what their civilization had become, chose change. The war that had been meant to end with humanity's extinction instead ended with the birth of something entirely new, a galactic civilization where the barriers between species, between organic and mechanical, between individual and collective consciousness, had been transcended entirely. Standing on the bridge of her hybrid ship, watching as the last Velter holdouts surrendered to the inevitable tide of change, Lixa felt a presence she had thought lost forever. Not the creature that had claimed to be her daughter, but the actual essence of the child she had loved, transformed, evolved, but still recognizably nearer. "Thank you, Mother," the child's voice whispered in her mind, "for trusting me when I wasn't trustworthy, for following me when you didn't know where I was leading, for choosing to save everyone instead of just ourselves." "What happens now?" Lixa asked, looking out at a galaxy that was already beginning to change in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. "Now we learn," Nira replied. "We explore, we grow, we become something the universe has never seen before, a civilization that survived extinction. By choosing to evolve beyond the need for extinction, the purge was over. Humanity had not just survived, they had become the catalyst for something that would echo through the cosmos for eons to come. In the end, the species that had been marked for extinction became the ones who ended extinction itself. And in the quantum foam that connected all things, the echo of a simple human truth spread outward toward distant galaxies. Sometimes the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, but transforming them into something better than they ever thought they could be.